we've got the potential level of output where the long run aggregate supply curve intersects the horizontal axis. So long run equilibrium in the macroeconomy, long run equilibrium occurs when all three curves intersect. So that's kind of a starting place. Short run equilibrium occurs at the intersection of aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. I want you to think about that being the current state of the economy. So this is the current state of the economy. So our president in the United States, when they first come into office, gives us the State of the Union address, right? Like, what's the state of the union? Where are we at? Where are we thinking of going? So the current state of the economy is the intersection of these two things. And then the last note I want you to add is where the economy is going. So kind of a key point here is that in the long run, the economy is headed towards the intersection of aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply. My phone just vibrated. You guys win. Oh, that's my wife. Pull out a piece of paper, put Rust Busted on it. You got 30 seconds. You can put wife call if you want on it. That'll help me remember what it's for. So today's date is the 12th. Put 412 on there. Wife call, Rust Busted. Give you, let's see, 13 seconds to get those in. I turned it to vibrate during this last time. So. All right, here we go. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. All right, so where we're going, where we are, ultimate outcome. Okay, long run, short run, and kind of where we're going. All right, back to this picture, back to the cleanup I wanted to do. I'm about to move on. I'm going to add on, but yesterday we did this. So go back to, if you've recopied this, go back to your notes from yesterday, or Wednesday rather. I had this going up to, what was it, 105? All right, so the price level rose to 105. We had a wage of $10. And we were thinking that the economy is going to move from A to B to C. Why does that happen? Because in the short run, resource prices remain fixed at 10, which works to the benefit of businesses if we want to think back to a business, right? They're getting higher prices. The Pepsi company is getting higher prices for the product, but they're not paying their workers any more money. So they're making extra money, right? That's a good thing for them. So how do they respond to that? Well, they make more soda. And so that's what pushes us out to this output level that's greater than where we were at. Now, the thing that I flubbed up a bit yesterday was where we were headed. How did we draw that? We had... Oh, that's what it was. This was actually the 105, right? All right, so why don't you just switch that to the 105? I think that'll be the cleanest thing to do. Go ahead and make this 103, just for fun. And the reason that is, just to recap from yesterday, is that this is a new long-run equilibrium at $10.50 because that's 5% higher resource prices, which matches 5% higher output prices, and we've restored equilibrium. We've restored purchasing power in the economy, so things come back to equilibrium. So both A and C are long-run equilibriums. Okay, this has a special name. This is a gap. It's called an output gap in general. Whenever the current state of the economy is different than what we expect it to be in the long run, there's a gap. And in this case, when the current level of output exceeds the potential level, it's called an inflationary gap. An inflationary output gap. So the definition, if you want to add that on here, would be just whenever the current state of the economy, let's put it this way, let's put current is greater than our potential. Whenever the current state of the economy, the output level, is greater than our potential, we say that there's an inflationary gap. Now that makes sense by looking at the outcome. What's going up as this shifts to the right? What's going up over here? The price level, which is inflation. So as we start to move this direction, we have inflation. Now think about the long-run correction. People start asking for higher pay. The long-run correction is inflation goes up again. So the direction of change, the path of adjustment for the economy, in this case, is to move from A to B to C, which is ultimately inflationary. We're seeing inflation occur. Okay. So let's do another example. Questions or comments on that? Let's call this example number 2. Now this time, don't draw the long-run equilibrium right off the bat. Watch what I do. Are we in long-run equilibrium? No. What is the current state of the economy? Greater than or less than the potential level for the economy? Less. There's a few graders. So the current state of the economy is where these two intersect each other. So the current state of the economy, let's just call it Y1, is here. And maybe this is at an inflation rate, let's just call it 120, just making up some numbers. we're not doing as good as we could be, right? In fact, if we were to liken this back to the production possibilities curve, what would you say is kind of going on, or the production possibilities frontier? We got old friendly beer and pizza here.
On the outside.
We're not on that outside, right? We're operating inside. We're not being as efficient as we can for some reason. There's some sort of mismatch of resources in the way we're producing output. We're not utilizing technology at the fullest extent possible. Something's going on. And we call this a recessionary output gap. Recessionary output gap. Now note here that a lot of times I'm combining a couple things here. Anytime output deviates from its potential, there's a gap. So we call that an output gap. And so we'll a lot of times just put these two words together. It's a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap. You don't have to necessarily insert that word output. Okay. So what is the natural way the economy will adjust to this? What is the natural way? Where is the economy headed in the long run? Increase in where? Increase in aggregate demand. How? We had shifters. The only way we can get that thing moving is, the only way we can get the golf club heading this way is if something's a-moving. Move the supply. So you're disagreeing with the demand part.
Well, the shifters would be the CIGS. One of the
Right. So we got consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. Now, if I'm not telling you anything of those things are going to change, which is kind of our baseline assumption, the thought here is, how does the economy naturally correct itself? The supply. So what's happened here is there's a mismatch between resource prices and output prices. And we need to have some deflation in prices. So in the long run, we're always headed towards the intersection of aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply, unless something happens. If there's a shifter, one of the C plus I plus G plus X that we went through. But if we just kind of leave things alone, Adam Smith style, hands off, let things work themselves out, the natural adjustment would be to move to here. So if we were starting at point A with a recessionary gap, the economy would move naturally towards point B at PL2, and maybe the economy deflates to 110. Again, I'm just throwing up some numbers to motivate things. All right, so key point here, the natural way the economy corrects itself back to potential in the long run is through a decrease in resource prices. Like big W that we've been putting, the nominal wage. And let me go ahead and add the word nominal. I snuck it in a few times. We're looking at nominal resource prices, big W, when we think about that. All right, so, yes?
I just want to make sure I understand this. So, like, in this situation right here, for example, like, a business is, they're not producing what they could be, maybe because their prices are too low for their wages being too high. And so to correct that, they're going to decrease their wages.
decrease. They're going to look for ways to reduce costs. You can kind of think of them wanting to reduce costs, which might be bidding down wholesale prices if they're a retailer. You know, they might be beating up their suppliers, asking their employees for a wage freeze. We're in recession now, so everybody, button down the hatches here. We're going to have to hunker down. Don't expect any big pay raises coming up. So that's the idea here with resource prices are going to adjust.
Would that be through shift in the short-run supply then? Short-run market supply? Or how?
Yes. Yes. So what would be happening here would be
Like
gradual adjustment back. Notice as resource prices fall, businesses are able to engage more resources, right? They're able to afford to buy more resources. And so eventually that stuff works itself out, working back to potential. So this would be the long run adjustment. I guess let's call this a 1 and a 2. So the natural economy corrects itself in the long run through a decrease in resource prices, which is a shift to the right of the short run aggregate supply. And if we're following our little model here, SAS 2 to this one. How long is that going to take? Gosh, the economy's in the toilet, and people are not knowing what to do, and this is going to be the ultimate result. Yeah, we'll be there, but it's going to be in the long run. Well, how long is the long run? Well, Keynes has a very famous quote. He said, in the long run, we're all dead. So, how long is the long run? Question mark. Keynes, who's kind of known as the father of macroeconomics, although he's highly disputed now and there's other theories of thought that we're going to get into, Keynes in about 1936 wrote a book. In fact, it was his part of his dissertation for his PhD. So he's a young guy, full of energy, comes up and just smacks microeconomics, smacks economics in the face, and says, wow, maybe we could do something here by the government playing a bigger role in the economy. And so Keynes in 1936 says, in the long run, we're all dead. Let's not wait that long. Let's not suffer that long, because maybe there's another option. Looking back at your shifters now, if we're at point A, what could be done in the form of government policy? What could be done? Look back to your shifters. What could we do if we're at point A and we don't just want to sit on our hands and wait for the economy to get back to potential? Pump money in the economy, that would be one, okay? T or G, right, fiscal policy. So, if we did a T move, what would be the appropriate T move to get us, obviously we don't want to move this direction, folks, right? So we want to move this direction. What would be the appropriate T move to get us heading that direction? Tax breaks, right. So a lowering of the tax rates would give more income to people to spend, more disposable income. They start spending, and that was our mechanism here that jumped into the C. They start spending more money, and we start to move this direction. So I want to put an alternative state of the world. One sec. I want to put an alternative state of the world here at AD1. And let's call this B prime, because we can't be at both places. So we can be at B or B prime. Those are kind of two alternative states of the world. Michael, you had a question?
Well,
Yes. So the natural progression of things would be for resource prices to adjust on their own, the free market, the invisible hand. Keynes said, Adam Smith, we don't have enough time to wait for the invisible hand to work. Let's take an active hand. The government's a big player in the economy potentially. They can build bridges. They can build the Hoover Dam. They can buy weapons to fight guys like Hitler over in Germany. They can do this. They can do that. We can spend money. We can get this engine a-rolling. Right? So let's do that and stimulate demand kind of artificially through dropping taxes or, what's the other one? So we hit dropping taxes, increase spending. So build the Hoover Dam, put a bunch of concrete into the world. So we increase government spending. And then Julian mentioned monetary policy. If we loosen up monetary policy, we looked at some models to where that would tend to drive down interest rates and potentially stimulate investment. So active policy in some form by the government, whether it's through monetary or fiscal policy. Did I see another question? Yeah.
So is it more effective to give tax breaks to corporate businesses or to the people themselves?
That depends. Depends on the status quo. And so we're not ready to really get into Chapter 13. We're going to get into actual U.S. Policy in a little more detail. But that is the magic question that's going to be debated probably from here to eternity. But at least now we got to start to get the direction of the changes. Okay, good. Good question.
So what you're saying is that if we want to do it in the long run, then we're going to shift the supply. But if we want to get there faster, then we need to shift the aggregate.
That's the thought, yes. Now, that doesn't come without consequence, though. What are our three main goals that we hope policymakers are keeping in mind when they get into policy changes? Three goals. 1, 2, 3. Real GDP. Low stable inflation. Low unemployment. How are we doing on all of these things with that policy change? Expansion, and I didn't mention this yet, but that's expansionary fiscal policy, lowering of taxes or increasing government. Either way, you call those expansionary fiscal policy because we're trying to stimulate aggregate demand. Or expansionary monetary policy would be kind of increasing the money supply to drop the interest rates to raise up investment. What's going on with our checklist? Number 1, how are we doing there? Good? Yes, we got good. We're going from Y1 moving this direction towards potential. Check. Low stable inflation. We're increasing inflation. Now, if inflation doesn't go up too much, maybe it's not too bad, but in general, we're having inflation go up. So this one we'd probably get the not quite good. Low unemployment. Are we helping unemployment or hurting it? Helping it, right. More GDP means more employed people and less unemployed people. All right, so that then sets the stage for these trade-offs that we haven't really talked about yet. That's really paramount for economic policy. What we're going to find is that it's very rare to be able to satisfy all three of these things. There's going to be trade-offs with them. Okay, so Keynes says, how long is the long run? In the long run, we're all dead. So let's use fiscal and or monetary policy to increase aggregate demand and hopefully move towards B prime. Move to B prime faster, presumably, than allowing the economy to eventually get to B.
Are all three goals met we were
Well-
to increase the supply rather than demand, would all keep that?
There's kind of a stock flow problem with that. So in long run equilibrium, it just is what it is. So that might be at a higher price level, and so therefore the equilibrium, given the current state of affairs, is not achieving these goals. And so the question would then be, how do we deflate the economy? So I just heard Brazil on the news this morning. They're starting to get some inflation pressures. I think it's up to 6 or 6.5%. I didn't quite hear the radio thing quite clear enough, but so they're starting to see some inflation pressure. So maybe they're in a long run equilibrium given the current level of government spending or fiscal irresponsibility of whatever the government's doing. And I'm telling more into the story than I even know. But so whatever's going on is leading to this long run equilibrium of a high inflation rate. So that doesn't make it good or bad, it just is what it
So
is.
there's a lot of things that can affect where you end up in the long run.
Yeah. Yep. So it's again kind of just the current state of affairs. It kind of is what it is. Then we might need to make moves to change that. Okay, other questions or comments on that? All right, so we've really set the stage now for the heart of the debate between classical economists and Keynesian economists. The big battle. So, classical versus Keynesian. In general, and I'm giving somewhat some nutshell arguments here, but the classical argument would be a more hands-off approach, let the market work on its own. The Keynesian approach would be to have your hands on the wheel in terms of the government with their ability to influence some of these things. Hands on, hands off. We got a lot more detail to fill in from there, but you can start to see the difference that it can have with what we've shown so far. Back to your first picture, when we opened up an inflationary gap, in the long run, did that increase in weapons help us? The very first example I went through that I already erased up here. If I look back to your notes, the very first one that we kind of recapped today. So we had an increase in aggregate demand, but I started from a long-run equilibrium. It opened up an inflationary gap, which means, hey, output went up, thumbs up. Unemployment went down, thumbs up. Inflation went up, not so good. But then what was the long-run adjustment? Just an increase in inflation. So now if we recap that and take a more long-run view, starting from point A to point C, did this go up? No. Did this go up? Yes. Did this change? No. So all we did was create inflation, which has no value to the economy, in the long run. The counter argument to that the Keynesians will make is, in the long run we're all dead. I think we can help in the short run to keep us somewhere hovering around this thing. And I actually need to start bringing both my golf clubs now. I've been trying, since I'm carrying all this other equipment. Gotta have my props. Doggone it. What do we got here? Keyboard, chair. Yeah, maybe the trash can. I got the chair, maybe some toilet paper. All right, I guess I was hoping to connect the markers. I've done that in the past. All right, we're gonna use this little weenie marker, sorry. So, visualize that, since you guys hopefully got the gist of this thing's going up, Now, in reality, what's going on is things are moving together, right? So if I was to shift both of these two things simultaneously, let me do one little one. Shift, 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 shift. If I now shift, the path of the economy really doesn't go from here to here to here, but it might follow some trajectory like that, right? And so the thought is, can we maintain active policy and keep us around our potential? Always using the government to counteract sometimes maybe the wild things like the financial crisis that that old market system can crank out. Can we successfully do that? So that's in large part what we're going to think about the rest of the semester by analyzing some models and look at a lot of these issues in greater detail. Okay, questions or comments on that? We got recessionary gap, we got inflationary gap. Next chapter.